literally the VIX low of the entire time throughout pretty much this whole crisis that all started in 2020. We're about to hit that 14.13. Maybe worthwhile having an alert. Hitting 14.13 as we hit a 4,300 to 4,350 on the S&P. Certainly interesting, and I would keep it in mind. Utility stocks are oversold. Consumer staple stocks are oversold. We obviously talked about that. But I want to get into this flow. So this is a share off Twitter. And basically, it's a pretty interesting one when you think about it. Effectively, it is a whole bunch of short calls. So you can see here, sold calls. So these are sold calls to open. And take a look at their strikes. 4,300, 4,290, 4,300, 4,300, 4,300, and some put, and then another one. So these are fairly large premiums, and they're all coming in. And look at the dates. They're basically selling premium over the next, let's call it, month. And they're starting to say, well, I don't think the market's going up very much more from this point. That's what all of it. Look at it. It's ridiculous. It's a lot. So they're loving it. They're opening up the old calls. And they're saying, I love the premium. So will this start to actually top the market around 4,300, 4,350? Well, of course, the strikes would say, yeah, very possible. And the options have been pretty reliable recently with this type of stuff. Let's move over here to the options flow itself. We saw big movements. Now, interesting, look at the call volume starting to get up there with the put volume. So all of a sudden, we've got big switches there. Still got a lot of puts on the queues, but of course, calls are going up across the board. Tesla was probably one of the more interesting ones in terms of just having tons of 220 calls. So everyone's like 220, 225, a lot of short dated calls, which remember the short date ones are pushing it up, and the long date ones obviously sometimes put in the floors. Disney was one we discussed about the floor possibly being in, had a great session, 2.5% is not too bad. And you can see here, it's actually did an island reversal. So if this is a real rally, we should see some individual stocks start to pick up a lot. Russell was also interesting, less calls than puts, but there's overwhelming amount of puts on the Russell. So the Russell's been one of the most putted things in a while. If we scroll down here, 59% on the call rate. That's getting high. That's getting very high. 47 million options. Look at that. That's big. That's over the normal 40. So it was a huge options day with a ton of calls, with everyone YOLOing all over the place. And of course, then all of a sudden, a whole bunch of people, well, some large players going, I'm going to sell some calls on top of everything. So they're obviously betting on stagnation or possibly a little bit of over exuberance here, a little bit of FOMO coming through this week into maybe dying off a little bit after the Fed's mid-month announcement. Of course, that's where they may announce 45 basis points, although people now believe they won't be doing that. We'll find out. Let's have a look at the big positions here. So you can see Qs made up the significant kind of volume. Then we had IWM. And again, you can see the puts were bigger and the calls were smaller on IWM. That one has been getting stacked with puts quite far out. A lot of people going very negative on that sector. Gold, etc., and a few others, we're having a little bit of trade on them. But what I'm more interested in is when we go over here to the SPY. Notice these short date calls. All the short date calls, 427, 426, 428. Look at that. 1, 2, 3, 4. Top 4 positions, all calls, all short date. One on the 5th to 428. But realistically, we're starting to get up there. If you keep seeing these 430s and 435s, in terms of the call rates, I think you're going to most likely, hopefully, start to see some puts come through on those strikes or just slightly underneath. Scroll through, you can see SPY made up the biggest trades of that session. Now, Tesla 220 was one of the big strikes here. You can see 220 getting struck, 210s again, all 0 DTEs, and a few coming through for this week ahead. So will Tesla be able to get to 220? It seems like a few call riders are call buyers are trying to get it there. And I think Tesla, Amazon, NVIDIA certainly backing off. And as you scroll through here, you can see NVIDIA, more puts actually starting to appear onto it. So maybe it is being a turn here, and we'll look at the charts soon for that. Let's move over to the announcements. 25% of people now only believe a 25 basis point hike will come. This is economists anyway. And you can see here that it's a significant switch from them being almost 70% only a week ago. No one has any idea. It's pretty clear of that. Let's have a look at the sessions. And this is the last 5 days. Consumer discretionary having a stonking good job. Of course, we also got regional banks doing well. XLK has remained good and semiconductors, but it'll be a different story when we look over the last 24 hours. And of course, gold was doing great, and then it suddenly wasn't. Metals up as well, thanks to that switch in yields, which occurred. So you can see here, most of metals gains were all on the Friday. Non-farm payrolls came in super hot. Yields went up. Metal likes that, and we saw 4.26. Energy also liked that, plus into the OPEX. But look at the difference here. The downs were semis, technology. That was like rotation circus. And look at the defensives. Now, interestingly, look at where the defensives came from. We'll show you on the chart. They were all negative in the morning, and then they kept grinding up higher. I'm looking for defensives here very much to see whether they actually have a couple of days of overperformance. If they do, then I feel like that with the skew, with a few other things, and the 4,300, 4,350 possibly hit here, we might be starting to see the real signs of, if we get a technical signal, an actual swing move. That would be pretty exciting if we saw one. That'd be a while. At the moment, it's been mostly bullish for a while. So just before we jump into the charts and we take a look at everything to do with the hottest levels right now, I wanted to talk a little bit more about rotation. And I thought it'd be a great time to also discuss the sponsor of today's video, which is Tiger Brokers. Now, if you're from anywhere around the world, you can check out the description down below for the special offers. But if you're from Australia or New Zealand, you'll be able to take advantage of a new special offer of 50 Microsoft fractional shares when you fund with as little as $1,500 over the first 7 days. That's on top of the normal bonuses you get for checking out the platform. So let's have a look at the platform together and discuss the last 10 days. Now, you'll see a bit of a shift here. So I don't think it's a surprise. Everybody knows semiconductors have been on fire, and realistically, it's been tech, 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 tech. However, something changed over the last 24 hours in markets on the Friday. And what that was, of course, it was a rotation out of semiconductors as we see NVIDIA and the likes of AVGO, which we'll watch soon, possibly have blow off tops, and a movement into the other more hated sectors. Take a look at the best ones for the day. Regional banks, diversified banks, specialty chemicals, defensives in general. And we saw a significant switch, as we already talked about, through utilities and staples, where they started negative and then started to run throughout the day. Is it a defensive move? We need, of course, really 2 to 3 days in a row to start to say, we know what you're doing, Wall Street. And along with the skew, that could be very important. If you're interested in things like this, remember you can do it all in the platform. If you want to know which are the best performing industries over the session or best perform industries maybe over a week, you can do so. And it's really, really helpful to be able to jump in. You say, I'm interested in gold stocks, and to be able to see all the major ones straight away there. So what are you waiting for? Check them out in the links in the description down below. All right, let's move over to the charts. Dollar index first. Dollar index back to criticals. So somewhere in this area between 104 and 104.28, we expect the bears to have to really hit it if they're going to. This is going to be more of the day trader, scalper kind of way of doing things. This is certainly an area of interest, and it basically followed the path that we thought it would. We sold off, we found the buyers, fantastic. We came back up into our critical zone. If bear's going to take control of the US dollar, they should do it relatively around here. You can see gold getting compressed back down, pretty bad weekly. Daily came back to really our trend line, which is pretty much what we expected. Again, dollar up, we expect gold to get hit. Gold got hit at the supply, so this is the heavily traded supply zone. If it's going to find buyers, needs to do so pretty much within the next $5 an ounce. So buyers need to commit while the dollar needs to weaken through the next couple of sessions. If we're going with one of the most powerful sectors that was pulling the markets through the Friday, it's going to be XLI. Is this an island reversal back in terms of it's going through? Might have a little bit more in it. Basically, when I see XLI, I don't tend to see as much, full on, consistent, constant runs that come off this sector. But if it's going to break out, you can see here 102, big level for it. And it has had the momentum through at least the Friday, an island reverse on the back. If it was an accumulation, maybe it will go. Let's move over to US oil here. You can see that oil has recovered quite a lot. 2 days worth of recovery, coming back into one of the most traded zones. For oil bulls, you're going to really want to see this thing take out this most traded zone, pretty much $78 a barrel. That's quite far away. For bears, anything in here is very interesting. And then, of course, the next level would be around that 78, 77 a barrel. I wouldn't fight it in here too much. I think it's going to be very, very tough. If we take a look at the weekly, I'm not as negative on oil at the moment. I've stated why. I believe it generally has a run in the early of June area, plus the OPEC stuff. And then we tend to, get a little bit more of recovery into what usually would be demand destruction. If we take a look at the defensives here as we get into the market, I want to talk about this. So we've seen big trade volume, interesting. We've seen an interesting base, certainly happening there. We've got utilities and staples starting to find their feeding. And I'm looking for this to continue. I basically want to see buyers recommit to these defensive stocks that they have sold over the last couple of weeks. Of course, they've been one of the most hated sectors. We've reported on it many times, oversold potentially, TD9s, all sorts of things. But it's more important to actually see that the market's going defensive. So if the market is going defensive, usually they'll rotate into XLV, XLP, REITs, that kind of thing, and XLU. Well, there were some nice breakouts here. Obviously, on the weekly, you can see some rejection wicks. That often means that there are orders being placed around that, and volume was pretty consistent down near the lows. What about Tesla? It got a new high on it, maybe 228 this week. It's possible. It broke out. It's very unlikely that, it's basically on resistance, you can see here with the daily, but it's very unlikely that these calls don't continue usually on Tesla for a little while. I'm waiting to see a real switch there on them. I've said that I don't know if this is very technical. I think it is more driven by these short date calls getting wild on this stock. And that's why you often see with Tesla, huge rallies with almost no pullbacks. It's because everybody just jumps on the call wagon and they all get hyped, and then you have to start to wait for the puts. So Tesla, be a little bit cautious here. I still don't change my fact that I think this thing is going to go to 145 in the future. However, this is trading, so you've got to look at it and say, well, have we seen the puts start to appear yet? AVGO, I think this thing is probably in blow off. So what that means is we dropped around 13+%, 15%. We probably see a rotation into it still as people buy the F and dip. That's what they say. And they get excited about it. I'm not a big one on that strategy. But what I can say is that this is symptomatic of the end of a trend. And I think with the weekly close being like that, it's consistent. Strategy like this or strategy like this usually is common. And it's what allowed us to believe that there was a rotation that was probably occurring in the back end of the markets. And you saw that with underperformance of tech stocks through the Friday session and really a bit of last week. Let's have a look at NVIDIA here. NVIDIA didn't drop as much, but AVGO might be the lead for it. Certainly hovering around these upper zones. Obviously, you could see that as an island reversal with a gap up, gap down, then just a retest to go short. I'm not big on shorting these types of things. I don't really like doing that, but I like to, spot it. If you did want to short, would it be safe to do so here? I think time will be your friend. So you'll need a bit of time. And unfortunately, it can take a while to degrade a position that had so much strength in it. Does that mean that NVIDIA is going to zero? No, but it was named in Cramer's Magnificent Seven. So you got to be careful about that one. I posted it on Twitter. It's pretty funny. Disney over here, nice island reversal for Disney. We spotted it with some of the unusual options activity. Obviously, volumes have been increased as well down here after the earnings report, which probably shows us some kind of pig, some person with information has been starting to pick up a position. That's a good island reversal, maybe a couple of days swing for Disney moving forward. That's usually a bullish sign. The type of way it's traded and all of those things make sense. Let's go over to Apple. Has this hit its high? It's now the highest weekly close that we've ever seen. So there you go. It's still doing pretty good. Up 0.48. Yeah, I mean, I'm just saying watch reaction here. I'm going to set alert for 182.93. That could be a good day trade level for shorters to come through. We've got a pretty extended market, and we know that this is an all-time high. So there's going to be a lot of stop losses sitting behind that. I wouldn't mind to be patient and react to that, see what happens. Let's move over to the DAX. Strong session for the DAX. DAX cannot get underneath here. We reported on the idea that Europe was relatively weak in comparison to the US. Pretty important point for it coming forward. Obviously, we know that we're at all-time highs on this particular index. That is the 16.3 level. And we need this level to be closed for swing trader shorts to actually come in. There are still no shorts active on most of these markets. The only one that's a little bit negative has been, of course, the Australian market. Now, that will open up bullish because of the metals moves. So that will be big for Australia. and it'll probably push us back into around that 72.20. You can see here the trend line that we've been talking about, the 61.8 fib of the retracement. But if we